Fourth try is the time. Let's see if I can actually record a podcast here. Let's see. Is this going to work? Podcast here. Oh, yep. Okay, we got audio. We have audio. All right. Hey, guys. What's going on? My name's Tappers, and welcome back to another episode of the Danger Boys podcast. This is episode 7, I think. And today we're going to be talking about the Lost Franklin expedition of 1845. So I guess talk a little bit about what's been going on with the channel before we jump into talking about Sir Franklin and what happened to him. Just really enjoying where the channel's been going. Really appreciate the feedback from the last podcast episode. I got a lot of views on it, which I think really speaks volumes to K2, as a mountain. Just how cool it is and just how much interest there is in it. So, we just got hit, I live in the Northeast. We just got hit with a lot of cold weather. It's been freezing outside, literally freezing. I think it was 6 degrees yesterday. Got hit with a bunch of snow. So after talking about K2, I figured, hey, why not keep it on the cold weather theme? I wasn't going to stream this one actually. So I stream these podcast episodes before I record them. While I record them, I also stream them to my Twitch channel, Tapper74. Link will be in the description if you guys want to drop a follow to watch me record the podcast live. But I wasn't going to do that this time. I was like, you know what, I'm just going to record it locally and then upload it, without streaming it. But I had some problems with my recording software. And actually, I had some problems streaming it too. It took me 5 minutes to get my mic recording properly, and then trying to stream coming through the right audio channels. That's a mess. But we got it working now. So, as always, guys, I really appreciate the feedback. Always a comment. Let me know, what I could be doing better or other podcast, topics you want me to talk about. I always appreciate, always a like, subscribe too as well. I really do appreciate the subscriptions. Helping the channel grow a little bit. Helping me, grow this podcast a little bit. Like I said, I greatly appreciate that. So, let's get talking about Franklin. So, Sir John Franklin was a commander in the British Royal Navy. And, up until the 1830s, Great Britain was always at war, whether it was with, the Americans, right? American Wars, independent Civil War, or the War of Independence, oh my God, of 1776. Or before that, the 7 Years' War with France, the War of 1812, right? But up into the 20s and the 30s, the whole war thing kind of settled down. Great Britain was, kind of the dominant European power. And Great Britain's looking to expand. And one of the ways they want to do that is through the Northwest Passage, which is at the time, it was a rumored, shipping passage from, one end of Canada to the other. That's basically what it is. That's what the Northwest Passage is. So, above Canada, there's a bunch of islands. And in the winter, it's all, frozen with ice. But in the summer, when it melts, there's shipping lanes. And so Great Britain, really wants to find the Northwest Passage. And that was what Franklin's goal was when he left, England, was to, go find the Northwest Passage. So let's get into it. So Sir John Franklin, right? He was born April 16th, 1786. And, when you're a teenager, right, when you have any sort of... hey, what's up, fat boy Skibby? Hype. Yeah, I've been good, dude. I've been good. How about you? Yeah, I've been chilling, dude. Just chilling. So when you live in Great Britain, and you have any sort of, nobility or, your parents are, upper crest, right? And even if you're a poor kid, you go and join, the Royal Navy. That's just something that a lot of people do. It's very common for a lot of people to join the service. And that's what Sir John did. Well, he wasn't Sir at the time, but just John Franklin at the time. He joined, when he was a teenager in the 1800s. Like literally 1800 was the year that he joined. And he worked his way up pretty quickly through the ranks. And so in just 12 years of service, he became a lieutenant during the War of 1812, which is another war I'd love to cover later on down the line, another podcast episode with, Great Britain burns down the White House, we burn Montreal. It's a really cool story. But so in 1819, right, Franklin's reached out to by the Admiralty, who's going to be a common character in this story is the Admiralty. Those are the guys who are like in charge of all the British fleets, all the ships, all the, everyone is, that's who you answer to, is the Admiralty. So the Admiralty makes him a lieutenant, or sends him on, after they make him a lieutenant, they send him on a exploratory expedition into Canada. Basically trying to find the Northwest Passage, right? That's what they want to find. They want to find a way through the ice, through the islands, and in 1819, this expedition was actually a disaster. His crew ended up starving, and a lot of them actually had to eat their own boots to try and survive. There was some rumors of cannibalism, but we'll get into this a little bit later too. With cannibalism, it's seen as like it's one of the worst things you can do in this time period, especially in Great Britain. They're very stuffy. They're very, a man dies with honor. That's something that's very common as like a theme, as a quote unquote good British man. And this is actually a huge stain on Franklin's career. For the rest of his life, he's known as, the guy who ate his own boots. And it makes him kind of a bit of a joke with the rest of the Admiralty. And the Admiralty works kind of like a club, where like a PTA or something like that, where you have all these old men who sit around all day drinking brandy, smoking cigars, and gossiping and complaining to each other about different things. So in this high society, Franklin is seen as, like I said, a joke. He's not taken seriously because, in 1819 he led a disastrous mission where, like I said, his crew had to eat their own boots and perhaps eat each other in order to survive. But again, that was kept all kind of hush-hush because, if you were known as a cannibal, that's worse than eating your own boots. So, yeah. So, moving on. So, here we go. Great Britain, just a little bit of history behind the Northwest Passage and Great Britain's search for it. So, you can see over here there's a map, right? So, you see Greenland. All right, so most of these expeditions start in Baffin Bay, which is right off of Greenland, coming off of the Davis Strait. And then you kind of, snake your way through these islands to try and find your way to the outside. Now, up until the early 1800s, no one had really gotten past Baffin Bay. There were some expeditions that got a little further inland, or you come up from the Hudson Bay. That's another way of doing it. So either you're going from Baffin Bay to go north, or you come in from the Hudson Bay and try and go, kind of a southern route. And so in the 16th century, right, that's whenever this kind of all kicks off. So like the, mid 1500s, late 1500s is whenever the first kind of expeditions start. And there were so many. So a couple of the notable ones was in 1577, Martin Frobisher. I don't know exactly. I think that's pretty close. He led an expedition into Baffin Bay, right, which is this top area. And that was one of like the major, first push-throughs of Great Britain's expansion into the Northwest Passage. And then by 1840, most of the northeast of Canada had already been explored. Pretty much, everything you basically see in yellow was pretty well mapped out. But everything past that was pretty much a mystery. They didn't know what was out there. And that's something that we think of with Christopher Columbus. Whenever he sailed, from Europe through the Atlantic, he didn't know what he was going to find. And we're, in the 1800s, we're still kind of there as far as, what lied north of Canada and what lied south of, Argentina, like the Antarctic. We didn't the South Pole and whatnot. We didn't know what was there. So we had a lot of incomplete maps, right? And so Franklin's goal was to finish mapping it basically. Hey, get up into the Northwest Passage and then, finish mapping out the rest of the route. Right? That was his goal. Because at that point we already, they already had a pretty good idea of what was up there and they just needed Franklin to finish it. So here we go. So here's why the Northwest Passage matters, right? So up here, kind of in the middle, or not, top area is England, right? And England, as we know, they dominate the world, right? They have colonies all over the place, Australia and India, and they got colonies all over the place. And shipping is a very difficult thing, because if you want to get from Great Britain to, let's say, India or Japan or China, you have to go around the Horn of Africa or South America to go. And so you have to sail all the way down and then all the way back up. It would be so much easier if you could just go straight across the top of Canada, go down past Alaska, and then, you're over here. So that's why they're so determined to find the Northwest Passage, is because it's, like I said, it's so important to maintaining the structure of this kind of empire that Great Britain is building and trying to maintain, with all their colonies and whatnot. So I said they're trying to find a way to get around Africa, and they're trying to find a way to get around South America. So the Northwest Passage is just kind of what makes sense. So let's talk about the ships that were used during the Franklin expedition, right? So you have two ships, the HMS Terror and the HMS Erebus. And Erebus, if you know what that comes from, it comes from Greek mythology. It's a part of Hades. That's supposed to be like a dark place. And so that's what they're named for, right? Which is kind of funny. That's something else I think that leads a lot of interest in this whole Franklin expedition, is that the ships are called Erebus and Terror. There's there's a lot of fear that's incited from that, but that's because Terror and Erebus were originally warships. They weren't exploration ships. They were called I think the term was bombers. So they would have giant mortars on their decks, and that's what they would use as their primary weapons, was mortars. So the inside of the ship, like the framework, was very, very sturdy, which actually made them very ideal for being transferred over into ice-breaking ships, because they had such good hulls and they had such good infrastructure on the inside, because of the mortars. Those mortars create such a huge downforce onto the ship that it has to be that strong. So Terror was built first in June of 1813. About 102-foot deck, so a pretty big ship. And it first saw service in the War of 1812, right? So the War of 1812, it wasn't just a year, it was, a couple years actually. So like I said, it was built in 1813, used in the War of 1812. And by 1828, like I said, wars were pretty much done in the, as far as the British, what's the word I'm looking for here? In British history, just in that time period, there wasn't a lot going on from the war front. So Great Britain decided to use this opportunity to try and to explore. So Terror was stripped of all its guns, and it was they added a whole bunch of new devices, right, to help it in Arctic expeditions. And Erebus, right, HMS Airbus, was constructed in 1826 and had a 105-foot deck. So it was actually slightly bigger than Terror. And it was fitted as a warship. It wasn't really used. It was in the Mediterranean, so like around Spain and Rome, that area, just, again, trying to fortify the British expansion. And then it was refitted in 1840. So it spent about 20 years as a warship, and then 1840 it became refitted for Arctic expeditions. And some of those fittings include central heating, which was a state of the art at the time. They ran pipes throughout the ship, and hot water would be run through the pipes, and that would like I said, central heating. They also reinforced the hulls, so the where the water, right below the water line, that was all lined with reinforcements. And so there's a guy named Ross, and he went on a expedition to Antarctica in 1839, finished up at about 1843, and both ships performed admirably. Oh boy, that's a tough word. They performed great, right? And these really were great ships. They really were. They were some of the best ships from that day. They were not necessarily the fastest, but they were strong. They were very, very strong. So when it came around to the Franklin expedition, they said, hey, we have these great ships. Let's choose them again. Hey, Dragon Slayer, what's going on, man? Yeah, I'm finally back. Record another podcast episode. So yeah, whenever it came around to do Franklin's expedition, they were like, hey, we have these great ships. Let's keep using them. So let's talk a little bit about these other guys in this time period. The other guys who were also out there exploring. It's been a while. Yeah, it's been a hot minute, dude. Been crazy. So Sir John Ross, right? He was the guy who took the ships down to Antarctica, right? So Sir John Ross, born 1777, his first Arctic expedition was in 1818 as a new attempt to find the Northwest Passage. So they have all these expeditions from like the 1500s up until like the mid 1700s. And then there's the war with America, right, for independence, and Great Britain goes broke. And by the early 1800s, Great Britain's economy has finally recovered enough to where they can start doing these expeditions again. So he's part of the first expedition to try and find the Northwest Passage. And his last expedition actually was in 1850, and that was to try and find Sir Franklin's expedition. He sailed, like I said, up into the Arctic to try and find Franklin unsuccessfully. Another guy, Sir Frederick Beachy, he was born in 1796. And he actually served with Franklin a few times. One of the first times was on the HMS Trent in 1818. And then while in 1825, he was commanding the HMS Blossom. And the Blossom's goal was to explore and map the Bering Strait, which is on the other side of Canada. He was given the promotion to Rear Admiral in 1854, and he actually named Beachy Island, which is a place that's going to come up quite a few times over this podcast episode. He named Beachy Island after his father. So he didn't name it after himself, he named it after his father. And then the last guy we're going to talk about is John Ray. He was born in 1813. And unlike these other guys, he wasn't really a sailor. He was much more, he was on his feet a lot more. So he got a job when he was a teenager working for the Hudson Bay Company in Ontario. And while living in Ontario and working in, the wilderness he learned to live off the land from the native Inuit. He became accustomed to them and learned their ways and how to survive and fend for himself in the ice. And during his time, he explored a lot of Canada over land. So he wasn't sailing. He was, using dog sleds and walking. And then once Franklin's crew was lost, he actually went on 3 expeditions to locate Franklin's crew. And on his third and final trip into the Arctic to try and find Franklin, he ran into an Inuit tribe that had seen Franklin's crew in their final days. And they had stories about, Franklin's crew, what they looked like, what they were doing, things of that nature. And at first, John Ray was kind of a little, wasn't disbelieving, but he was like, okay, this seems a little too convenient. But then the Inuit, they actually had artifacts from the from the expedition. They had spoons that belonged to John Franklin and could be, identified as such. They had belt buckles, and they had, pins and medals from clothing that the crew would have been wearing and the officers would have been wearing. And so the tribe told, Ray, hey, not in these words, obviously, but said that, the men were starving, they were dying. We tried to give them food, but we didn't have enough to feed everybody. And, in the end, they resorted to cannibalism to try and survive. And again, whenever Ray went back to England to report this to the Navy completely just disregarded it. They said, these, and again, there's a lot of racism at this time too. There still is in the world, but particularly back then. So the Inuit were seen as savages, as liars, as, these heathens that, couldn't be taken seriously. And that these heroes, that's what they were. That's what Franklin was. He was a hero. He was seen as, kind of an astronaut, to be honest with you. These are guys going off to far distance lands, exploring worlds that we can only imagine. And so being told that they resorted to cannibalism, it was disregarded. But on later expeditions, in recent years, up until like the 1980s, there was evidence showing that the men did in fact resort to cannibalism, which I believe is, it's something where when the human body has been pushed to its breaking point, and you have no other option. I mean, what do you, it's so hard to put yourself in their shoes, but when you have no hope and you have no food and you're starving, you'll do anything to survive. And so that's something where I don't see it as something that's, it's just a tough situation, man. It's a tough, shitty situation. But yeah, so like I said, at the time though, basically this whole Inuit story was thrown out. But today it's one of the more credible stories we have about the expedition. So let's go back to the plan, right? What's Franklin's plan? What's the Admiralty's plan? What are they doing here? So Sir John Barrow was appointed to the second secretary to the Admiralty in 1804 and remained at that post until 1845. I don't know why I said 1945. That should be 1845. He remained at that post until 1845. 1945 would have been a miracle. And he served under King George, and he was one of the guys who was really pushing for this whole Northwest Passage thing. He had kind of convinced the rest of the Admiralty, like, hey, this is something that we really need to get, we really need to be pushing some, we gotta explore this Northwest Passage. Excuse me. So after several successful attempts that Barrow put together in the mid 1800s, 1830, 1820, 1840, Barrow was looking to put together another expedition, right? Like, hey, we have all the success, we have a lot of momentum right now, like, let's try and get one more expedition together to try and finish off this Northwest Passage. So Barrow's first choice respectfully declined, right? He was like, hey, I'm not going back into the cold, like, that sucks, I'm not doing it. And then his second choice was declined by the Admiralty, right? So the Admiralty looked at this guy that Barrow wanted to use, and the guy was seen as too young. So he was rejected, and he actually became the helmsman of the HMS Terror. And then the third guy was Francis Crozier, right? And Crozier was very qualified, but he was Irish. And again, there's this stigma with Great Britain that, being an Irish guy, he's not a true-blooded British man. And so he was, denied, basically. So then that left Barrow with one choice, and that was Franklin. Now, at the time, Franklin is actually the governor of Tasmania in Australia. So Burrow reaches out to Franklin and says, "Hey, I'm putting together an Arctic expedition. I want to put you in charge." And Franklin goes, "Okay, that sounds, I'm all right with that. I'll step down from my position as governor of, Tasmania, lead this expedition into the Arctic, redeem myself as the man who ate his own boots, and hopefully come back a hero." So Francis Crozier, like I said, was very qualified. He could have led the expedition, but again, being of Irish descent, he was kind of given, he was not treated with respect. So Franklin was the commander of the expedition, and he was put in charge of the Erebus, right? The Erebus was seen as like the flagship, and then Francis Crozier was given the command of the Terror, and he would have been second in command on the expedition, and kind of in charge of his own ship, right? So like whatever Francis wanted to do on his ship, he could do as long as Franklin allowed it, basically. So on top of the central heating system and the reinforced hulls, the ships were also given locomotive steam engines, or one engine per ship. And this was designed to run a metal propeller at the, aft of the ship. That's the back of the ship, I think. Yeah, because bow's the front, right? So at the aft of the ship, there would be a metal propeller that whenever there was no wind, you could turn on the locomotive engine, and that would drive the ship forward. But the problem is that locomotive engines are not designed for the ocean, right? So you're getting like 4 or 5 horsepower out of this thing, and it's just not enough to break the ice. And they were given enough coal to run the engines for a year and a half. That's how much coal they had. As well as they were also given 1,000 books, so they had a very extensive library, because, when you're on a ship, you need to entertain yourself. Another thing was costumes, so they could put on plays for each other and, performances, just things to keep the guys going. They also would have been given sports equipment, so like balls, like soccer balls, maybe even like a cricket set. Like I said, just trying to, keep the men going. So one of the biggest things, right, was at the time, one of the newest inventions was canned food, right? So that was what the expedition's main source of food was going to be, was these tin cans. And 7 weeks before the expedition set sail, the contract's finally given to Stephen Goldner for 8,000 tins of ration, right? So you got 7 weeks to get 8,000 tins of food together. That's more than 1,000 tins a week. That's a lot of food to try and make and prepare properly, which they were not able to do, actually. The evidence shows that the tins of food were not, the tin cans were not properly sealed. And then the expedition was also given a dog and a monkey. These were gifts from Jane Franklin, John's wife, aka Lady Franklin. There's really no reason, right, to have a dog or a monkey. I guess the dog could work as like a, I don't know. I don't know what the hell you do with the dog and a monkey, but Lady Franklin thought that it would be good for morale, so they brought him along. So this was in 1845, right? So that's whenever this is all happening. So, setting sail, right? So on May 19th, 1845, Franklin, his 24 officers, and 110 men left from Kent, which is, in Great Britain, England, to sail for Scotland. So they're going to sail from Kent up to Scotland. They're going to pick up the HMS Rattler and the Barito Jr. I think that's how you say it. So during these wars, right, that happened previously, there was a lot of ship capturing going on, so sometimes you end up with some weird ship names. You're like, wait, that doesn't sound like a British vessel. That's probably because it's not. So the Rattler and Junior were going to accompany Erebus and Terror to Disco Bay, right? So if anything goes wrong while we're sailing over, we have some ships to, help us get things back. And also, Junior was carrying 10 heads of cattle that were going to be slaughtered when they got to Disco Bay, which is in Greenland. So whenever they got to Disco Bay, like I said, they slaughtered the cattle and they stored that on Terror and Erebus for fresh meat. And then 5 men were feeling ill from the expedition. They were somewhere, along the way sailing over, they got sick. And so they were sent back. Now, we don't know exactly what they were, what illness was ailing them. It could have just been a normal flu. It could have been pneumonia. It could have been TB. We don't know. But these guys got lucky. This expedition was doomed. And leaving early was what saved. I think 2 of them died and the other 3 survived. And also pictures were taken in Greenland of the men. The crew had a camera that was a gift from Lady Franklin, and this is one of the pictures they took. There's also a picture of Franklin as well that was earlier on in the slides. That again was taken with this camera, which again is very modern technology for this expedition. So yeah, let's see. Am I forgetting anything here? Yeah, no. So, whenever they get up here, despite the 5 guys being sick, everyone else is in pretty good spirits. Everyone's pretty happy, pretty jovial. We're going to sail through this Northwest Passage. We're going to map the rest of this, and then we'll be home, in 2 years. The food they were given, the 8,000 tins of food, was for 3 years, right? And so, no one's expecting this to go wrong, which is kind of exactly how it went wrong. So the last sighting of HMS Terror and Erebus. So in July of 1845, right, so a couple months to sail over to Greenland, the crew find themselves at the top of Baffin Bay, right around where this blue arrow is, and they're waiting for the ice to clear so they can sail into Lancaster Sound and kind of get started on their journey, right? They want to head through Lancaster Sound, start heading west, and get sailing. But like I said, again, the ice is in the way, so you got to wait for it to melt. Oh. And so, while they're waiting for the ice to melt, or at least clear out of the way, 2 whaling ships, the Prince of Wales and Enterprise, see Erebus and Terror in Baffin Bay. They notice that the men are in good spirits, and that nothing seems out of the ordinary, right? And this is the last time anyone ever sees Erebus or Terror or any of the crew alive again, besides the Inuit. This is the last time the Europeans ever see them. Again, the Inuit tribes did come across them at one point. So here we go into the unknown, right? So one of the biggest problems with researching this topic and getting into it is that there's so much of it that we don't know. Because again, the men disappeared, and there very little clues were left at the time, especially, that were found as to what happened to the guys. So like I said, the 2 whaling ships were the last Europeans to ever see the men alive, and then much of what happened afterwards is really speculation on our part. So the hard facts are the expedition spent the winter of 1845 and 1846 on Beachy Island. Right, despite losing 3 men over the winter, the crew was in high spirits, waiting for the ice to clear so they could sail through. They sailed through Peel Sound in the summer of 46. So, the ice melts, you keep sailing. But at the end of the summer, the pack ice coming from the north, right, so from the North Pole down, kind of crushed the men and the ships up against King William Island. And then 2 years later, we know that Franklin died, as well as 8 officers and 15 crew. And then in 1848, with Franklin dead, Francis Crozier assumed command of the crew and took the remaining men south to march towards Back River, about 400 kilometers south. And Back River, what they were hoping to do was to get onto Back River and then use Back River to sail down, into northern Canada and hopefully find, some form of outpost. And so one of the problems is like I said, at the time it wasn't fully mapped. They had a pretty good idea, but they didn't know. And so King William Island, they didn't know if it was an island or if it was a peninsula. So trying to navigate around it was something that they would have struggled with, as far as which direction to go. And we don't know exactly what happened, what their decision was, but we know the aftermath, and it was, it doomed the whole expedition. So, the rescues and discoveries, right? So, 2 years go by, and there's no word, right? And this is when we're expecting word. We're expecting them to be out of the ice after 2 years. We know that they have food for 3, but Lady Franklin is very concerned, right? So she goes to the Admiralty and she says, hey, my husband's missing. There has been no word from him. Please search for him. And the Admiralty said, hey, we're not worried. Franklin's a good leader, which they knew was a lie. They have plenty of food, which again, that's questionable, especially because the rations that were made were insufficient. And so Lady Franklin goes to her friend Charles Dickens, who is a very famous author. And she goes to newspapers, and she's a high society woman, and she has a lot of friends. So she uses her influences to try and sway public opinion, right? And so finally, after enough public pressure, the Admiralty sent out a 3-pronged search party. So we're going to send one party kind of following the Franklin expedition through Baffin Bay. We're going to send another group over the land, from like Back River up. And then we're going to send another group like from Alaska, basically. And this resulted in basically nothing. Nobody found anything. And part of that was because they were searching in the wrong area. So, like I said, nobody knows what happened to the Franklin expedition or where they went. They know that they were in Baffin Bay, and then they disappeared. That's really it. So there's a lot of ice up there. There's a lot of, water and islands. They could be anywhere. So after this expeditions, these 3 rescue attempts come back with nothing, a reward of 20,000 pounds was offered. That's about 2 million pounds today. And a whole bunch of people get into it. Like I said, Lady Franklin is in the newspapers. She's very famous because of this whole lost expedition thing. So people from, the Americans get involved. People just like normal, merchants. If you have access to a ship, you're going out and trying to help find Franklin's crew. And so the first clues are found in 1850, right? About 2 years after Franklin's men left the ships to travel south. And it's found on Beachy Island, right? So on Beachy Island, they discover where the men camped, and the graves of 3 men from Franklin's crew. So while they were on Beachy Island, right, the 3 guys died, and they were buried. So in 1854, John Ray, who was the explorer who worked with the Hudson Company, met with the Indian people who told him about the starving white people from Franklin's expedition. They delivered him, the artifacts. And so Ray returned to England with these artifacts and with his story. And the Admiralty denied that they committed cannibalism or resorted to cannibalism, but also declared the entire expedition dead. They said, hey, it's been 2 years since they've been heard from. They're probably dead. And so Lady Franklin, pleaded with the Admiralty, like, please keep searching for my husband, and the Admiralty refused. So she used crowdfunding to pay for one more expedition. She said she was significantly wealthy, and she knew a lot of wealthy people. So she got all of her rich friends together to try and, get an expedition together to try and find Franklin. And the expedition set sail in 1857. So we're up to almost 10 years since we last heard of Franklin. Have any idea where he was. And of course it came back empty-handed. There was no evidence found. And despite the fact that the Admiralty gave up and Lady Franklin kind of accepted her husband's fate, civilians still kept looking because, why not? We got nothing else better to do. So, in 1895, Lieutenant William Hobson had sled parties. There's 4 or 5 groups of sled dogs that were together, and they found a cairn left by Crozier. And cairn is basically just a stack of rocks with a letter inside, or anything inside, but in this case it was a letter. And the letter was left by Captain Crozier, right? And so the first letter was dated the 28th of May, 1847. It stated that Terror and Erebus were trapped in the ice, that Sir Franklin was still commanding, and that all is well. However, in the margins of that first note, a second note was written. And this one was dated April 25th, 1848. So a year later, it stated that the ships were stuck in the ice for a year and a half. And the note went on to say that Franklin had died 2 weeks after the first note was left. So in the 28th of May, 1847, everything's fine. And then 2 weeks later, apparently Franklin's just dead. And everything went to hell. And then Crozier went on to say that him and the remaining 102 men would march south to Back River to try and escape. Now, one of the most intriguing things is what happened to Franklin. How was everyone in such good spirits? How was everyone apparently, doing so well? And then 2 weeks later, Franklin's just dead. What happened? How did he die so quickly? And another thing is that, the ships were stuck in for a year in the ice. So the problem is that the summer of 1847, right? So, when they wrote that letter in May of 1847, they were expecting that by June or July the ice would have melted, but it didn't. The ice didn't melt. So they spent the whole another summer stuck in ice. And so, without the ice melting, they can't make any progress. And the entire time this ice is pushing up against the ships, it's, they're leaning because, the ice isn't flat, it's at different levels. So the ships are moving, they're being, contracted by the ice. And also over the winter, in the Arctic, it gets very, very dark. You're maybe getting an hour of sunlight a day, probably less. So you're spending all winter in the dark. It's freezing, the wind is howling, and the boat is just being crushed by this ice. It must have been absolutely terrifying, and so disorientating. And, you're trapped on the ship with 102 other guys, bickering and fighting and, people just getting on each other's nerves. It must have been an absolute nightmare. So the search of King William Island, right? So after the cairn was discovered, this kind of renews the search for Franklin's crew. Right? Obviously not his crew alive, but just what happened to them. And so they start searching around King William Island. And so more remnants were discovered, right? One of the first things that they found was the skeleton of Thomas Armitage, which was a fully clothed skeleton they found. And he had letters on him from fellow crew members. So he was a steward, right? So he was a note taker. He would have been, and also too, the ships were near each other, but they weren't next to each other. So in order for the ships to talk to each other, you have to walk across the ice. So delivering notes back and forth, that probably would have been this guy's job. We don't know how he died necessarily, but his skeleton was found intact with all of his clothes still on. And then on the western side of the island, they found a lifeboat containing 2 skeletons. And in the boat, they found a bunch of supplies, but none of it was like what I would consider to be necessary. There were boots in there and there were rags, but also like soap and books and sponges. Like, why do you need books? How does that help you? It helps on the expedition when everything's going fine. You're bored and you can read a book, but you're trying to survive at this point. What does a book help you with? So I don't know why they had those items on them. And then in 1860 and 1869, two expeditions found grave sites on King William Island, including the grave of the assistant surgeon of Erebus, Harry Goodsir. His remains were shipped back to England, actually, and he was buried at the Franklin Expedition Memorial I'm trying to remember the name of the college, but it doesn't really matter. And this was one of the last significant discoveries until the 1880s, right? So they found a whole bunch of graves, they found a bunch of dead bodies, empty campsites, fragments of, the expedition, but nothing conclusive has really been found, and no evidence pointing to what happened to the crew has been discovered. So here's what we know about the expedition now, right? So over here at the very top right of the screen is that strait. Hold on, we'll go back because I forget the name of the strait. Lancaster Sound, that's what it was. So up here's Lancaster Sound, right? Back, off screen a little bit. So Franklin's men, right? They want to sail through here. The winter hits, and so they have to camp at Beachy Island in 1845, 1846. The ice melts like it's supposed to, and so instead of heading straight, they decide to go south and use this island as protection from the pack ice, right? The pack ice is coming down from like the North Pole, and so they make it to about here in 1846. Now, if they traveled around this side of King William Island to head back inside like this cove, where it says Starvation Cove, the ships probably would have survived. Because King William Island would have protected them from the pack ice, and whenever the ships were completely frozen in and the ice didn't melt, sorry about my phone, and the ice didn't melt, the island would have protected them, and they would have been much closer to down here where Back River is, right? But instead, they're out here in the open, and so they have to march all the way down through King William Island, all the way down, cross over this little strait here, go all the way down to Back River. You're adding hundreds of kilometers of walking that could have been avoided if you had just been able to get back behind King William Island. But like I said, at the time, these maps were not complete. And so they didn't know if King William Island was King William Island or Peninsula. Because if you sail into King William Peninsula and you end up on this side, there's no way through. Now you're trapped. There's no way of getting out. So like I said, they decided to make camp out here in the open. You can see here where one of the cairns was left with the notes written in it. And then Terror is over here and Erebus is over here. This is where the wrecks were found. So there's some gross imagery coming up. This is a bit of a warning if you don't want to see anything gross. Minimize the video or look away, and I'll let you know when you can look again. But you can keep listening. There's nothing gross. What am I going to say? But here we go. So in 1981 and 1982, a guy named by the name of Owen Beatty, Beatty, I think it's Beatty, led an expedition to King William Island to try and search for Franklin's crew to see what happened to them. And he wanted to find a body, right? That's what he was looking for. He was looking for a body. But the only things that they found were fragments, right? They didn't find a full body, which led Owen to be quite disappointed. But Owen takes the fragments of human bone back to his lab to be, studied to see, what caused their death. And this is whenever we discovered that they had, in fact, resorted to cannibalism. And the way you can tell cannibalism is you can see, the knife marks on the bones. Or, there was decapitation to try and, hide the human element of the meat that you're eating, and bite marks and whatnot. So we saw evidence of that, or he did at least, in the bones. And also the crew was suffering from cannibalism. Scurvy. They resorted to cannibalism, but they were also suffering from scurvy, which is something that we hear all the time about pirates and, scurvy. But it's from a lack of, vitamin C. Or not vitamin, what is it? One of the vitamins. Anyways, you eat lemons, right? You eat lemons, and that, helps fight scurvy. There's certain, like I said, there's certain vitamins in fruit that you need that you don't get at sea, because fruit's so hard to preserve. But the most interesting thing was the amount of lead discovered in the bone structure. So upon analysis, there was actually almost 10 times more, 10 times the normal level of lead in the bodies, or the bone fragments, which was something that, like I said, was very peculiar and led to a lot of questions as to why was there so much lead. And we'll get into that. We'll get into why there was so much lead. So in 1984, Owen received permission to travel to Beachy Island to exhume the bodies of the 3 crew that were buried there. And so they did. They traveled to Beachy Island, and they dug up the bodies, and that was actually the body we saw in the previous slide was one of them. And hair and skin samples showed that the crew would have been suffering from extreme cases of lead poisoning, right? And lead poisoning attacks your body, but it also attacks your brain. So you don't think right. You become delusional. You could even become hallucinogenic. So on top of the starving and the scurvy, you're also delusional, and you're hallucinating, and you're acting irrationally. Not to mention pneumonia and tuberculosis. I mean, these are, everything's kind of fighting against these guys. Not to mention just normal frostbite and, snow blindness. Like, these are all contributing factors that led to the entire crew being doomed. But despite the lead poisoning, pneumonia was actually the official cause of death for all 3 men on Beachy Island. It's probably what killed Franklin as well. But examining the Beachy Island sites where artifacts were found, we see that the tins of food that were prepared, 8,000 tins of food, were so rashly prepared that they weren't sealed properly, right? Which led to lead contamination. Also, the ship's distilled water systems, which were run by those locomotive engines, were also contaminated with lead. So the lead from the food, the lead from the water, plus pneumonia, plus hypothermia, there was just so many reasons for these guys to end up dead. And there was really no chance at all for these guys surviving. It's really sad, to be honest with you. So, kind of questions that we're left with, right? So, how did Franklin die? Why were the ships stuck? How did the rest of the crew die? What happened after the crew left the ship? Where are the ships now? What happened to the ships? And why didn't the search party start earlier? And what happened to the monkey and the dog? What happened to the monkey and the dog? Well, they, if they weren't killed and eaten for food, they probably starved themselves. And then, because, that the note left in the cairn was not very specific. It's something that I wish they would have been more specific on as far as what exactly happened, or leaving more updates. But we just don't really have that much information. So, like I said, speculation. How did Franklin die? Probably pneumonia. Why were the ships stuck? Probably pack ice. And the winter of 47, 48, or the summer of 47, 48 being so cold that the ice didn't melt. How did the rest of the crew die? Combination of starvation, lead poisoning, hypothermia, pneumonia, tuberculosis. What happened after the crew left the ship? They probably just walked themselves to death, to be honest with you. They probably, headed south towards Back River and never made it. And then why didn't the search party start earlier? These stuffy guys in their waistcoats and cigars and monocles, if they had sent out a search party in, 49, it's possible they might have found some crew alive. It's doubtful, but it's possible. And of course, we already know Franklin was dead long before that, but still, though. And then actually, we did find the wrecks. Where are the ships now? Well, in 2014, using sonar, the wreck of the Erebus was discovered in Queen Maud Gulf. It's about 35 feet of water between the ship and the surface. And when it was discovered, Erebus was in really good condition, actually. But stormy weather in the area over the last few years has actually deteriorated the ship significantly. And it's a pretty good chance that it will be basically completely gone within the next 10 years. And however, in 2016, HMS Terror was discovered off the coast of King William Island in a place called Terror Bay. She's at a depth of 79 feet. And she's actually in pristine condition. There's actually a lot of protection going on by the Canadian, wildlife and historical preservation societies. I don't know exactly what they're called, but to try and maintain Terror and to make sure that it's not disturbed because it's in such good condition. And then to kind of wrap this all up, right? Crew likely died of TB and pneumonia, with lead poisoning contributing to the suffering to just add pain to infantry, add pain to injury to pain. I don't know. What the hell? How do you say that? Forget it. And then one of the actual positives that came from this is that with all the search parties looking for Franklin and his crew, they actually ended up finding the Northwest Passage. And to this day, it's a major shipping route. One of the most important shipping routes in the entire world. Russia uses it, we use it in the United States, Great Britain uses it, it's a great way to bypass the Panama Canal. And, with the whole polar ice caps melting, the Northwest Passage gets bigger and bigger every year. Yeah, this is, The problem with the Franklin expedition when it comes to talking about it in a podcast format is that there's just so little information about it because the crew's lost. And, if we even had one survivor, we would know so much more. But alas, we don't. There was a book written a few years ago called The Terror. And it's about the Franklin expedition. And it gets really weird. It's not based on really anything historical. Like, the first half of the book is historical, but once the expedition ends up lost in the ice, it all becomes very speculative and gets all spiritual and supernatural. It's not a very good read. But there's a lot of really good information out there. If you don't know a lot about Franklin's expedition, there's a lot of really cool stuff regarding this. So I highly recommend you check it out. But yeah, so that's kind of it. That's all I got. Not a very long one, but solid, I think. But yeah, so as far as the future, I don't know what the next episode is going to be on. A lot of good options. So I'll think about it. Like I said, let me know in the comments if there's something that you want me to, cover next. I'm thinking maybe do another battle. Maybe do something from the Napoleonic Wars. Maybe do the War of 1812. Maybe do the stock market crash, of 28, 29. Do the Dust Bowl. That could be cool. A lot of really cool stuff. Hell, I might go back to mountains. Might do Mount Everest next. Who knows? Who knows where I take this? But yeah, so like I said, as always, I really do appreciate the support. I really do appreciate the comments and the likes. As always, if you guys can, subscribe. And like I say, if you want to see me record the podcast live, go to twitch.tv/tapper74. No outro music this time. I'm going to try and stop that copyright claim. So, we're not going to use any copyrighted music. But let me think. Anything else? No, I think that's it. All right. So, have a good one. And I'll talk to you later. All right. Podcast over.